Let's start learning about layer styles. So to get set up, I'm going to create a new document. The dimensions don't really matter. I'm just doing this for a demonstration. And to get going with layer styles, I will create a shape on the canvas. There we go. So Photoshop offers a lot of built-in effects that allows you to quickly and easily apply different kind of styles to your layers. These styles try to simulate light and properties in the real physical world. So to access layer styles, what I will do is show you first in the menu area on top. So if you click on the layer menu, you can see this group over here called layer style. And inside this group, you see all the different layer styles available to you. Notice there is a dot 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 next to them. So when you click on one of these items, there will be another step. So that's interesting to note because when you choose any of these layer styles, what it actually does is pop up the layer style dialog window where you could change all these kinds of settings. So have a look at some of these names. Bevel and emboss, stroke, inner shadow, inner glow, and then there are other ones like color overlay and gradient overlay. So these are overlays. So to give you a quick introduction, um, let's have a look at some of these. So I'm just going to start by clicking on the bevel and emboss and explain to you how this dialog window works. So the way I like to work with it, first of all, is take the window and just drag it to the side. This allows you to see what you're actually changing while you are changing it. So you can see now that I selected bevel and emboss, there's a check mark next to this option over here. So this area over here shows you all the different styles, and it also indicates whether the style is being applied or not. So because there is a check mark, that's telling me the bevel and emboss style is being applied. And now that this tab is active, what I see here on the right is the options available to me because of this selected layer style. So with the bevel and emboss, you can see all these different things that you could customize with the effect. So I'd like to point your attention to this area over here on bottom. Be careful. Try to avoid this button that says make default. Okay, we don't want to change the default values unless you really know what you're doing. So please avoid this button at all costs right now. But a button that's more useful to us is the reset to default. So I would start by clicking reset to default just to ensure that all the settings for this effect are now at their default values. And we can see things changed over here. And this is more of a typical bevel and emboss that is very subtle and easy to apply. So you see it adjusted values for the depth, for the size, for the softness, and other things. So what is a bevel? Well, it's that kind of soft rounded edge. You might notice it on the table you're sitting at right now. If you look at the edge of your table, is it a very sharp edge or is there a little bit of a roundness to it? So that roundness is the bevel. And we can play with these values using these options over here. So I will encourage you to explore them. Just when you do, do it slowly and carefully. So when I'm changing the size over here, I'm not just going to go right there to the max. I'm going to slowly just drag the slider and observe the changes over here on the left as I'm applying them. Okay, so subtlety is key here, and always change these values in very small increments. So if we want to try other styles, so what you can do is turn on the check mark for another style, and you'll see it get applied. But if you actually want to customize the settings for that style, you need to click on the tab over here. So if I were to click on the stroke tab, you'll see the options here change, allowing me to change the values for the stroke. If I click on the inner shadow, so it automatically puts the check mark on, and it switches to show me the styles, uh, the effects that you could customize in the right-hand side. So be careful with these. You don't want to just go wild and apply all the styles. You really want to be selective and choose the styles that are appropriate for what you're trying to do. So let's go ahead and look at some other layer styles. I'm going to move over to the drop shadow layer style, and you'll see you might notice this darkness that appeared behind my shape. So what I'm going to do is reset it to the default. So we start with a basic value, and you can see it's a very subtle shadow. So it's a very small shadow, and this is simulating light in the real world. So it's as if there's a light source on top of the shape projecting onto it, casting a shadow behind it. So you can play with many things about the shadow. You could change the angle that the light source is coming in. Okay, so by rotating this line around the circle, or by typing in a value for the angle. You could change the distance of the light source, which will create distance in the shadow behind it. You could change the amount of spread, and you could change the size. Okay, so have fun with this, but again, notice I'm moving the sliders very slowly and carefully, because if you just come in and drag the slider and go wild with it, you're going to create some really wild effects, and you want to avoid creating effects that don't look realistic. You want to keep it subtle and realistic. So I messed these up a little bit, so I'm going to reset to the default, and you can start again. So I will leave that to you to explore. Another one that is fun is the inner shadow. And instead of the shadow appearing on the outside, you have a shadow that now appears on the inside. So I'll just reset it to the default and show you that you could customize the shadow in similar ways. And maybe just the blend mode right now, you might want to avoid that for now. Okay, so blend modes, we'll talk about that in a future lesson. It does change how all of these effects work quite drastically. Sometimes you'll notice it, sometimes you won't. But let's just avoid this one for now. You can try playing with the color of some of these effects here, and you'll get some different results. Very subtle. A key trick is to turn the effect on and off quickly, and then you'll be able to observe the difference. I will point your attention to the inner glow and outer glow. So these could be fun. To create a glowing like effect on the shape. It's very similar to the shadow, but has some subtle differences. And we talked about bevel and emboss. So let's look at the stroke and the overlays. So right now I have a lot of effects going on here. I'm actually not sure why I have all of these. They might have been added at some other point. So if you don't see all of these effects, please note that you have this FX button over here, and it allows you to add an effect to this list over here on the left. So if something's not shown, you can simply add it over here. So I'm going to click on stroke, and you see I got an extra stroke now added to my panel. And if you want to remove it, because it is a lot, it's cluttering up my space over here, you can press the trash button over here to get rid of the effect. Okay, I'm going to do that for the color overlay because I don't want two of them. And all right, so that looks good. So let's look at the stroke. So the shape tool allows us to create a stroke, but you might find yourself in some situations where you'd want to play with the stroke using a layer style. And with the layer style, you're not limited to shape layers, as we will see in future lessons or exercises. So with the stroke, let me just start by resetting to the default, and you can play with the size over here. Right now I have a 1 pixel stroke, and it's black, so you can see that appearing over here. And if I just increase the size, again, slowly, carefully, you'll see the stroke increasing. You could change the color, and you could change things like where it is positioned. Right now the stroke for me is positioned inside, but you can also place it on the center or even outside the bounds of the layer. I will avoid blend mode for now, and you also have an option to control the opacity. So you have some different functionality over here, but the key thing is it could be easily applied in the layer styles panel, and you can apply it to layers that are not shapes. Right now I'm using it on a shape, but you can use these layer styles on any kind of layer. Let's go with the color overlay. So right now you see my shape disappearing because my color overlay is white. But I'm going to click over here and change the color overlay to a different color. So there are many reasons why you might want to do this. In the situation of a shape, you have the shape tool to change colors, but again, these layer styles could be applied to any layer. And the color overlay sometimes is very useful to just fill a layer with a color. So what it does is it replaces all the pixels in the layer with that color overlay. So you can play with the opacity to allow some of the original color behind it to show through. And you can play with the blend mode, which we won't get into today. And let's move on to the gradient overlay. So I'm going to turn the gradient overlay on, but you'll notice nothing happened. That's because these effects are stacked on top of each other. So the effect that is above the gradient overlay will kind of take precedence over the effect that's below it in the gradient. So my color overlay right now is completely covering the gradient. So let me turn off the color overlay. And now we see the gradient coming through. So I'm just going to reset the gradient to the default. And now we can see what the gradient is doing. So the gradient could get a little complicated. I will create a separate video showing you how to customize the gradient. For now, you can simply come over here and maybe choose one of the defaults that Photoshop gives. So if you click on this arrow, you can choose any of the overlays that are inside the folder. Simply click on an arrow next to the folder and then choose one of the swatches that appears. And that will load the gradient overlay with this default. If you want to customize the gradient, however, you could use some of these options here to change its style. So this is a linear gradient, but you have other options like radial to create a circle, and so on. And back to the linear, you could change the angle, the direction, the scale, and to really customize this though, you have to click on this bar over here. So this bar over here pops up the gradient editor. However, I will not show it in this video. Again, I will create another video to show you how to really customize the gradient to your liking. Finally, the pattern overlay. I only mention it to tell you you probably won't use it for me in my class. Okay, so I would avoid the pattern overlay um, because the patterns that come with Photoshop aren't very beautiful. Okay, unless they've added some in recent months that I'm not aware of. But these patterns are not very useful. Patterns need to be used properly, sometimes subtly, and sometimes you need to download your own patterns and install them into Photoshop or create your own patterns. But we're not going to get into that. For now, I just recommend that you avoid the pattern overlay and do not use it. So that's it for my introduction to these effects. In the next video, I will show you some more ways that you could interact with these effects inside Photoshop.